Hi, I'm Bill Newman with Freedom Restoration, and you just experienced a water loss. I'm going to take a few minutes here to let you know what we can do to get you back to your pre-loss condition in a reasonable time, explain the process, and answer a few questions that our customers have on many water losses. So how long does it take to dry, and how long will your equipment be in my house? That's a real question we get on every water loss. Well, first of all, we're trying to get your structure to about 15% moisture content for most substances before we pull our equipment. That lets us know when it's dry. We'll use a moisture meter here that's going to help us determine the moisture content of your substance. Typically, it takes 3 to 5 days to dry the home, and yes, it can get hot. But I want you to remember that heat is our friend. And this dehumidifier behind me is the most important piece of equipment that needs to run. Now, we ask that all of our equipment runs 24 hours a day, and that will allow us to get the equipment out of your home when it's dry, and usually in a much faster fashion if it's been running continuously. A common question we get is, how often do you need to come back to the house once the equipment is set up? Well, we like to come back every 24 hours just for a few minutes to take some air readings, to make sure that the equipment's running properly, and to see if we need to add or take away equipment so that we can make sure we dry the structure in a reasonable time. This meter here tells me not only the moisture content of your flooring, but we get readings of the relative humidity, the dew point, and the temperature in the room. So how do we know how much material to remove when you've had a water loss? We don't want to remove too much, and we don't want to remove too little. So we rely on a variety of tools to help us determine the wet areas of your home. We'll use a moisture meter, and this moisture meter is the most common tool we're going to use. It's going to tell us things like relative humidity, it's going to give us a dew point, but it's also going to tell us if your material is wet. Typically, most materials are considered dry if the moisture content is under 15%. When it comes in contact with a wet substance, you'll hear something like this. When it comes to your carpeting, we'll use something called a hydrosensor. And this hydrosensor will light up and beep when it comes into contact with something wet. Once again. And finally, in rare occasions, we may use an infrared camera. Now, infrared cameras don't tell us what's wet and what's dry. It's going to pick up vast temperature differences. So as we look at this wall, we can see there's not a lot of temperature difference, so you don't see a lot of changes in color. However, when we see something like this, we know there's a vast temperature difference. That could be an issue of evaporation, or it could be that something is perhaps much hotter or much cooler. In either case, it tells us that we've got something we want to look a little bit more closely at before we remove the material. So what about dust? We know you've been through a harrowing experience already and that you've experienced damage to your property. Dust, unfortunately, is a common occurrence. We have to cut into many materials, such as drywall, such as flooring, such as insulation, and when we do that, dust gets into the air. Now, we run something here called an air scrubber that will help remove a lot of the dust in the air. And in many cases, we'll even build a containment area. That being said, we can't get rid of it all. What I can promise you, though, is as we get near the end of the job, we will do a thorough cleaning before we leave for good. In fact, our employees will do their best to clean up the workspace each and every day. Another question we'll get from our homeowners is, should I keep my air on? The answer is absolutely. We like to keep the AC at about 70 to 75 degrees. What that does is that reduces the moisture in the air. And remember, our number one culprit here is moisture. So what happens after the crew leaves, the equipment's running, and then after a couple of hours you notice it's shut off? Maybe it's just the dehumidifier, maybe it's 1 or 2 fans, maybe it's all of the equipment. What likely has happened is that a breaker has tripped in the home. What we'd like for you to do is call our office immediately. We have staff on call 24 hours a day, and they'd be happy to assist you. I hope this segment has been informative for you. However, there may be some questions I left unanswered. Don't worry. Please feel free to pick up the phone and call us 24 hours a day at 478-225-6186. We have a staff on call 24 hours a day and 7 days a week that's available to answer your question.